This took place back in the early 90s. I grew up in a very small village in Peru, right at the base of a mountain. Life there was simple. Dirt roads, everyone knew everyone. The kids played soccer until the sun went down. Of course, we call it football. That was what I was doing one afternoon. I was by myself, kicking around an old soccer ball in the open field near the edge of the village. I don't recall why I wasn't with my friends that day. After a while, I noticed something I had never seen before. Surrounding this field was a forest, which we were told to never enter. Prior to this, a young boy was killed by a fer de lance, the most dangerous snake in our country. Jaguars were also known to hunt these woods as well, although they seemed to keep their distance from the village after being shot at many times. After an El Niño hit our village, some of the trees had been uprooted or knocked over. The base of the mountain was now visible from the open field. There was a small, dark opening in the rock face that was once hidden by the bushes and tall grass. It looked like the mouth of a cave. At first, I ignored it, but after an hour, the curiosity started eating away at me. I told myself I would just take a quick look inside. No more than 5 minutes. The moment I stepped past the entrance, the air changed. It became thick and heavy, like I was trying to breathe underwater. My chest felt tight, and I immediately became on edge. There were many small holes and cracks in the rocks above me, so daylight cut through the darkness and lit the way. I kept going deeper, even though every part of me was screaming to turn back. I then saw something. Hanging from tiny ropes were these dolls, dozens of them, crude little figures made of cloth and sticks. Each one had these long, rusty spikes or nails driven straight into the head or neck. Some had multiple. They swayed slightly, even though there was no wind inside this cave. I felt my stomach turn. I had heard stories about the Bruja who were brought here by the Spanish centuries ago. It was said that they were once healers before the horrors of the Inquisition exposed them to the brutality of their own masters. They turned to dark magic in order to punish the conquistadors, but were unable to control it. The elders of my village would tell us that some of them still live in these mountains. It was of course another reason to never venture out into the forest. All the children would eventually dismiss the stories as a fable. Remote villages, especially in South America, all have stories like this. However, from the moment I saw those tiny dolls hanging from the ceiling, I regretted not taking those stories more seriously. I should have ran, but something kept pulling me forward. The tunnel narrowed even more, until I had to duck my head. It was around here that the outside light stopped coming through. However, I saw that the corridor made a sharp turn. From around the next corner, I saw the glow of firelight flickering on the rock walls. I entered to see the light was coming from 2 torches that were mounted on the rock, burning with a low, steady flame. They revealed the full cavern. I saw bones, skeletons embedded into the walls, like they had been pushed inside the rock itself. More hung from the ceiling like ropes, just like the dolls were. Others were stacked in piles on the floor. Some were clearly animal bones, but most of them were human. Some of the skulls were small, like a child's skull. I stared on in absolute horror, unable to breathe. My legs finally listened to me and I turned and ran as fast as I could, scraping my arms and knees on the rocks as I scrambled back toward the entrance. I burst back out into the daylight and didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the village. Before I could make it to my house, there was a neighborhood girl named Valentina. She was around the same age as me. She stepped out from behind a wall and stopped me. She looked concerned and asked me what was wrong. I then told her about the cave, the hanging dolls, and the skulls and bones. While she was standing there, her eyes rolled into the back of her head until only the whites showed. A deep, demonic voice that definitely wasn't hers came out of her mouth, slow and clear.
"If you tell anyone about what you saw, your entire family will perish."
Valentina then collapsed to the ground. A second later, she woke up, confused, asking what happened. I helped her up, mumbled something about her fainting, then ran the rest of the way home without saying another word. I never told anyone else about what I saw. Not my parents, not my friends, not a single soul. I lived the rest of my life in Peru carrying that secret like a stone in my chest. I do remember that when I would return to the open field to play soccer with my friends, I was unable to relocate the cave mouth again. I did try searching for it in that same area, but it was nowhere to be found. In 2003, I finally moved to the United States. My parents passed away a few years ago, which were my last relatives that lived in Peru. For the first time in my life, I feel safe enough to speak about this. I still don't know exactly what I walked into that day. The stories of the Bruja from my village don't exactly match up with real history. But what I am certain of is that cave was used for some malevolent form of witchcraft. Some kind of ritual site, if I had to guess. Those tiny dolls with spikes in their heads, those bones that littered that cave, and that evil voice coming out of that little girl's mouth have stayed with me ever since. I'm fairly new to this channel, so if anyone listening has their own theories about my experience, I would love to hear them. This happened a few years back, outside of my workshop in Phoenix. I'm the guy you call when something with an engine breaks down. I've always been good at fixing cars, lawnmowers, and even off-road vehicles. So when my buddy calls me up and asks me to help him fix up this old dune buggy he bought off Facebook Marketplace, I said sure. He would have to pay, but sure. I knew a thing or two about dune buggies, and my friend had bought a piece of shit. But since I'm such a nice guy, I spent the next couple of weekends welding, swapping out parts, and getting it running again. The day finally came for me to test out my work. I told myself I would just do a short loop, nothing crazy, stay within a mile or two of the workshop, so I could walk back if anything went wrong. Of course, things went wrong. The buggy left me stranded maybe a mile out into the desert. Engine just took a dump, no warning. I tried everything I knew, but it wasn't starting. No cell service out this way either. So I had no choice but to start walking back toward the workshop, kicking up dust with every step. The heat was brutal that day. The kind that makes the air sting your mouth until it feels like sandpaper. I kept thinking how stupid it was to come out this far, but I was sure I had the engine working fine. I figured I'd be back at the shop in 20 minutes tops, and I'll have to come back with my truck. About 10 minutes into the walk, I noticed something odd in the sky. A single dark cloud, very small at first. I can't explain how jarring that is to see, just hanging there in the sky. Then it started growing, like fast, unnaturally fast. In less than a minute, it had spread out and swallowed the whole sky above me, turning everything gray and heavy. The wind picked up hard, and all of a sudden, the desert was getting pelted by rain, loud drops hammering the sand. Thunder cracked so loud, I actually covered my ears and fell to one knee. I started running, not because I was scared, but because for one of only a handful of times in my life, I didn't want to get drenched. As I looked up toward a sandstone peak off in the distance, I saw something. A figure standing at the very top, perfectly still, over the howling wind, I could hear something else. A low, rhythmic chanting. It didn't sound like any language I had ever heard. It rose and fell with the wind, almost like it was calling to the storm. Lightning started striking the ground around me, way too close for comfort. I spotted the old roof of a decommissioned gas station up ahead and sprinted for it, ducking under the overhang, just as another bolt lit up the sky. I stood by one of the gas pumps, breathing hard, watching the rain come down in sheets. The chanting seemed to grow louder now, even though I was under cover. I kept scanning the ridge, but the figure had vanished into the downpour. I waited there, soaked, breathing hard. The storm was violent, but it only lasted for a few more minutes. Then, just like that, the clouds started breaking apart, and the rain stopped, and the thunder faded. The sky cleared like nothing had happened. I stepped back into the sand, and immediately noticed something was not right. I was still wet, but the ground was bone dry. The sand looked exactly like it had before the storm broke out. There were no puddles, no damp patches, nothing. I pulled out my phone and checked the weather forecast. Clear skies, 0 chance of rain. The same forecast it had been all day. I stood there for the longest time, heart still pounding, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The figure on the peak, the chanting, the way the single cloud had exploded across the sky, and then vanished, without leaving a single drop on the ground. It felt like something deliberate. I eventually made it back and grabbed my truck and towed the doom buggy back to the workshop. It was a clogged filter if you were curious. Fixed the engine the next day, and that was that. I still think about that phantom storm every now and again. Rain clouds don't just swallow the entire sky in seconds and then vanish without leaving a trace. And then there was that chanting. That figure standing up on the sandstone, almost like it was calling the storm down on purpose. I don't know what it's all about, but something tells me that this might be witchcraft related. Definitely not something I fuck with. Ever since, I make sure not to go too far out when I'm test driving something. This happened way back in the mid-1970s, when I was just a little kid growing up in a small town in Ohio, about 20 miles south of Cleveland. Our neighborhood was way out in the backwoods. In those days, it was just dirt roads, thick trees, and not much else. Me and a couple of other neighborhood kids, all between the ages of 7 and 9, used to play hide and seek almost every day after school, because there was nothing else to do. Our favorite spot was this big old abandoned 2-story house that sat behind the old neighborhood. It used to be a bed and breakfast at one time, and it was run by this old lady. When she passed away, the house sat empty for many years. No one bought it, no one tore it down. It was just there. Perfect for us kids looking for a good hiding spot. One afternoon, we were playing like usual. I wanted to pick a different hiding place so no one would find me too quickly. I snuck around the back of the house, pushed open the door, and made my way up the stairs to the attic. Unlike my house, which had the classic drawstring folding ladder, this attic had its own stairwell from the upstairs hallway. I climbed the creaky steps and entered. I froze in absolute horror. There was a row of lit candles on the floor, maybe 10 or 12 of them, leading straight across the attic like a path. At the end of the candles, lined against the far wall, was a sight I still can't get out of my head. Dozens of crows have been disemboweled, then hung up on the wall, with their wings spread out. Their insides were arranged in strange patterns on the floorboards. The smell hit me all at once, and I felt my stomach flip. I turned and ran. I didn't even try to be quiet. In fact, I was screaming. I flew down the stairs, burst out the back door, and sprinted straight to my friends who were still in the yard. "You guys have to come see this. There's candles and dead crows in the attic. Someone nailed them to the wall." They looked at me like I was crazy, but they followed me back anyway. When we got to the house, the back door was still open, but when we climbed the stairs to the attic door, it was locked. It wouldn't budge no matter how hard we pushed or kicked it. We couldn't see any candlelight flickering underneath the door either. My friends didn't believe my story. They said I was making the whole thing up, and that I was the one that locked the door. When I told my parents that night, they just laughed it off and told me to stop making up stories, and to also stop going into that old house. No one believed me. Not a single person. I actually listened to my parents, and avoided going in that house for future games of hide and seek, before it was finally torn down to make room for the expanding neighborhood. But before the bulldozers were sent in, workers pulled out several remains of animal skeletons, mostly birds, but a few bigger ones that may have been dogs or cats. They also found children's clothing. They were unable to determine who they belonged to. The police came and investigated the house before it got leveled. Other than more animal remains, they found nothing to indicate anyone had been murdered there. Decades have passed, and I still think about those lit candles and those poor crows nailed to the wall. I still wonder who was using that house to perform what looked like black magic, and if it had anything to do with the clothing that was discovered there. I highly doubt the police did a thorough enough job searching that house before it was bulldozed. I'm somewhat addicted to watching true crime shows, and I can tell you from personal experience. In rural Ohio, back in the 70s, the local police probably didn't even know what forensic evidence was. No one will ever truly know what took place in that old house in the years it sat there. I'm not a clairvoyant whatsoever, but something tells me that if someone took a shovel and started digging where that house used to be, they would most certainly unearth human remains.
I used to work at Walmart as a cashier. Sometimes I would see some weird things working there, especially late at night. But the one that takes the cake is something that happened one particular night when I was fairly new to the job. So this was way back in the fall of 2004. I had just recently got my job at Walmart and was working as a cashier. I had only been there for maybe a month. I was only 17 and this was my first job ever. During this time, I did not have a car and would rely on my parents to drive me to and from work. So one time, I was working sometime in the afternoon until like 10 o'clock at night. Maybe 11 o'clock, I don't remember the exact time, but I do remember that it was pretty late. The shift was pretty average from the start. I don't remember a whole lot about early in it, but I do know that when it got to be nighttime, things were pretty quiet as usual. There were not many people there, and I would only have somebody come into my checkout line every here and there. Eventually, when I was off in maybe an hour, things were even more quiet. Then I saw someone approach my checkout. It was a man who looked like a clown. He was wearing pretty much normal clothes from what I remember, but then he had his face painted all white, and his hair was either painted red or it was a wig. His nose was red, and all around his lips was also red as well, and then he had painted on his eyebrows. It was the full clown look, and it was so much so that I had absolutely no idea what the guy really looked like. It was a strange thing to see, and I didn't know why he was looking like a clown. It was not Halloween, and I didn't know of any events going on nearby or anything like that. When I saw him, I don't remember what he was buying, but I think he was just getting like one or two things. I said hi, and then I asked him what he was doing looking like a clown. I was curious, and I remember that I asked it in a cheerful and friendly way. However, the clown looked at me with a very serious face, almost a glare, and did not answer. I thought maybe he lost a bet or something, and I asked him if he lost a bet. He still said nothing and just looked at me angrily. I said sorry and nothing else. The only other time either of us said anything was when I told him the price, and then he paid. He seemed very serious and borderline angry, and it made me nervous. So he took his stuff and then walked away and left the store. I continued on with work after that. For the next bit of time, mostly there really wasn't anything to do. Eventually, I got another customer in my checkout line and scanned their items for them. However, later on, when I was off in maybe 10 minutes, I remember that I saw a coworker walking by. It was someone who I was friendly with. He told me that there was a man dressed as a clown just walking around the parking lot. I said that that guy had been in my checkout line. My coworker said that it was really weird, and then he walked away. Then, a few minutes later, I was finally off of work. I went over and clocked out, and then I went out to wait for my mom to pick me up. Normally, I would sit out on the bench that was on the sidewalk directly in front of the Walmart building. When I got outside and sat down, things were obviously very quiet, as you could imagine. There were far less cars now in the parking lot, so I could see a large amount of it. Only about a minute or so into waiting, I saw the clown guy again. He was walking at the far side of the parking lot towards the back. He walked over a ways, and then he turned and started going up another road towards the store. I did not know what he was doing. The way it looked was that he was just walking around, not really doing anything. I remember that he was walking very slowly, too. It was really weird. He walked up that row and then crossed over into the row that was closer to me. I'm not going to lie, I was just watching him the whole time because it was so strange. When he started walking down the row closer to me now, he looked over and noticed me watching him. Then he stopped and just stared at me, once again with a very serious look. I looked away, but when I looked again like 10 seconds later, he was still there, staring at me. He hadn't moved at all. Now, he was still a good 100 feet away from me or so, but it was still unsettling. After staring at each other for a while longer, I waved, not knowing what else to do, to try to be friendly. He did not wave back. He just stood there and kept staring at me. Then I saw him shake his head almost in disgust, and then turn and walk back to another row of cars sort of away from me. He continued with his walk through the parking lot. I really didn't think that this guy was simply joking around and trying to be funny. It seemed like he was really serious. He then walked back over to the other row of cars to where he had been before that was closer to me. When he did, he once again caught me watching him and stopped and started glaring at me. He wasn't moving like before, but this time I had had enough. I got up and just walked back over to the doors and went inside the store. I waited for my mom in there for the rest of the time until she came to pick me up. Finally, a few minutes later, she was there. I quickly got inside the car and we left. When we did, I looked around for the creepy clown guy and I saw him. He was still there, standing in the parking lot and staring at me again. My mom saw him too, and I was glad that we were leaving. After that, I never saw him again. I still don't know who he was or what he was doing. I'm not sure if anyone from Walmart ever told him to leave or not. Back then, our store was open 24 hours, so he could have theoretically gone back in at any point. It was just really weird how he was so serious, yet painted as a clown. I'm just glad that I didn't see him anymore.